Hello to everyone. We will start now. My name is Sergio Verdugo. I am the Deputy Secretary General of ICONES, the International Society of Public Law, and an Associate Editor of the International Journal of Constitutional Law. On behalf of the co-presidents of the Society, Lorenzo Cassini and Rosalind Dixon, I would like to welcome you to this ICONES live event entitled Publish, Not Perish, Publishing Advice for Early Career Scholars. Today, we have three distinguished speakers. First, Professor Gráinne de Búrca, who is the Florence Ellingwood Allen Professor of Law at NYU Law School. She is an editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Constitutional Law, and she also serves on the editorial boards of the European Law Journal and the American Journal of International Law. Formerly, she was the co-president of the International Society of Public Law. Then we will have Professor Matthias Goldmann, who is a professor at the Goethe-Universität Frankfurt. He's an affiliate of the Max Planck Institute for Comparative Public Law and the International Law in Heidelberg, and he's also an editor-in-chief of the German Law Journal. Then we will have Professor Aileen Kavanagh, who holds the chair of constitutional governance at Trinity College Dublin. She is formerly a professor of constitutional law at the University of Oxford and on the editorial board of the UK journal Public Law and Law and Philosophy, an international journal for jurisprudence and legal philosophy. She is also on the editorial board of the International Journal of Constitutional Law. Each speaker will give presentations of 15 minutes. After the presentations are over, I will pick some questions from the audience and ask the speakers to reply to them. We invite you to please ask your questions using the Zoom Q&A function. You can also write on the Zoom chat if you want to comment, of course, but if you want your question to be considered by the panelists, please use the Q&A feature. We are recording this event. If you decide to ask a question, please take into account that the question may appear in the recording. If you prefer for your identity not to be revealed so that you can ask the question freely, you can ask the question anonymously when using the Q&A function. I'll be revealing the identity of the persons that did not select the option to write an anonymous question. When you ask a question, please identify the speaker to whom you're addressing your question to. So now we'll start with the first presentation, Professor de Búrca.
Great, thank you very much, Sergio, and welcome to everyone. Aileen, Matthias, and I had the idea that this would be useful for early career scholars. All of us worry about publication. That's something that lasts your lifetime as an academic, but it's particularly so at the early stages of your career. And so we're going to try to address slightly different topics and issues, mainly in that our geographic focus, where we're located, is different. I'm based now in the United States, Matthias in Germany, Aileen in Ireland, formerly Britain, and the sort of publishing worlds are slightly different in each of these. But what I thought, having initially planned to talk about publishing in US law journals, I decided to begin actually with a more general topic. So the three different topics that are issues that I'll address in my comments are, what to publish, interesting, how will I do that? Secondly, when to publish, and thirdly, where, the issue of where coming last. So why did I decide to start with what to publish? Well, the more I reflected on it, having been based in the UK for a while, in Europe, in continental Europe, in the US, and so on, is that although there are differences in the publishing worlds and differences in the styles, perhaps, and in some of the expectations, on the whole, there's something really in common, something similar that all journals are looking for when you're writing for them. And I thought it would be helpful to start with my sense after, quite a few years, decades, I will admit, on the editorial end of publishing and in submitting as an author myself, to what I think makes for a good article wherever you are publishing. And I have 5 different elements that I've sort of would separate out and identify. Starting with the first is it's important to have interesting material or interesting subject matter when you're writing an article. It can be anything. It doesn't have to be a grand theory. It doesn't have to be a path-breaking case, but it could be any of these things. It could be a series of events. It could be a trend that you've seen. It could be a particular case or a political event. And that subject matter or material, should be interesting, should be something that makes your audience think, I'd like to know more about this. The second thing I think that you really need for a good article is a good argument or a good question. So it's not just that you're describing something complex and so on that's happened or the way it's been addressed, but rather that you have a question in your mind or an argument in your mind, something that you want to explain and put across to the audience, to the reader. So it's more than just a descriptive piece. Description is very important, and good description can itself amount to analysis and argument. But it's important that you think to yourself, what am I trying to say in this piece? And that you can really identify that for yourself. So that's the second thing, a good argument. The third is that it must be well researched. So whether well researched means looking into multiple jurisdictions and having the cases, or identifying the literature that's already addressed aspects of your topic, or the theoretical framework on which you're going to draw, it must be a well-researched piece, not thin, not omitting important contributions to this issue already, showing where you situate your piece in the literature, in the scholarship, and professionally researched, well done. So interesting material, a good argument, well researched. The fourth, and this is equally important, these aren't in hierarchical order of importance at all, they're just the different elements. The fourth is I think that the writing must be clear, the clarity of your writing and your exposition and your organization. I really can't emphasize this too much. It's something I really learned in, I think, the US. In academia here, a really significant emphasis is placed on clarity, on really anyone being able to read your work and understand both what you're saying and what the argument is. That, complexity may be inherent in the ideas we're expressing, but they can still be expressed simply and clearly, and that, you can be hiding behind something occasionally. If something is very complex, it doesn't make it better. You should try to simplify, to clarify to the extent that you can, even when the ideas are complex or the argument is complex. And good organization is very important too. And finally, and again, it's not that having it last doesn't make it the least important by any means, but some element of originality, that something about your contribution is adding to what's already there. It doesn't mean that you have to claim no one else has ever thought about this before. That's almost never the case. All of us build on the work and the ideas of others. That's inherent in the scholarly enterprise. But nevertheless, that there be some element of distinctiveness, that what you're writing is your own and is not the same as many others have written or are writing. So an element of originality, distinctiveness, a contribution that you're making and that you can identify for yourself what that is. So I would say those are, for me, 5 very important elements of any good article, wherever you're submitting it, whether to a journal in Europe, in Asia, in US, elsewhere, Latin America, that all editors are looking for at least these elements and probably others. I also think it's very good to have an abstract, not just for practical logistical purposes, but an abstract helps you to figure out, have you understood your own article? Is it a coherent whole? If you can't say and summarize in a short, succinct paragraph or so, at most half a page, preferably less, what am I saying? How am I saying it? And to really get at the nub of what's important about your piece, then there's something not ready about it. It must be, if a paper is ready to submit, you will be able to write a compelling abstract for it. Think of it as, again, this is a little bit American on my part, having been here for a long time, but the elevator pitch, as they call it, if you were writing in an elevator with someone and had only a few minutes and wanted to tell them what your paper was about and why it's important to read it or why they should want to read it, that you could do that. Then you'll know if you've really, grasped the essence of your own argument and whether it hangs together coherently and that you've done what you set out to do. So that's the what. The second thing I said I'd mention is the when. So when to send a paper off. Well, you're always, moving between 2 different concerns here. One is not sending it off before it's ready, and the other is not holding on to it forever and thinking I must keep working on it, I must perfect it, and so on. I mentioned the second in particular because I've been involved recently in a number of discussions about gender and publishing, and some differences that we see in terms of the proportion of submissions and willingness to submit and so on. And a group of young female identifying scholars that I spoke to said, well, we never feel confident enough that it's ready. And I'm sure this is something that goes beyond gender, that it's something many scholars feel, especially at the early career stage, but generally. And it is important to make sure your paper is ready, that it's good enough, that you've revised it several times, that you've had people read it, that you had reaction to it, that you've thought about the issues that have been raised and revised it. But it'll never be perfect. I think that's really important to realize. Your article will never be perfect. There is no such thing as a perfect article. Again, just as I said, that no scholarship is entirely new. We all build on the work and the ideas and the contributions of others. Nothing is ever finished. You come back to your own ideas later. You'll find yourself picking up threads of your argument that were only half developed. It's not a bad thing that they were only half developed. They might have been as developed as they could have been at that time, but there's always more work to be done on what you write. So don't don't get too anxious about, I can't send this out yet. I think a very good and a very important thing to do if you're writing a paper and want to submit it is to make sure that you get feedback. Now, one way of getting feedback is the traditional one, which is you send your paper to others. But that's hard, right? Because not everybody has time to give you feedback. It can take ages. You feel like you're imposing on people. It's not always easy to find a good audience through sending your paper to people. What is, I think, a really useful thing, and again, this is, I'm influenced by spending time here in the US, everybody, what they call workshops their paper. You present your paper in an environment where other people listen to it and give you feedback. Now, that seems even harder to organize than just emailing a paper to someone, but actually, what we've seen here, we have a group of fellows at NYU, and we have meetings each week and they present their papers and give feedback to one another, and it's absolutely fantastic as a forum for learning what your paper needs, learning about the strengths, the weaknesses, how it reads to someone else. You really get invaluable feedback, and I think you can actually organize these amongst yourselves, so there's no need for you to be part of some program in a university that organizes them. Think of others at your stage, friends, colleagues, and email 4 or 5 of them and say, shall we, have a group meeting? We can do it on Zoom these days, very easy to organize. It's not as complex as it used to be. Arrange to present your work to one another and to give feedback. And I can tell you that you don't need, the sort of, professor of jurisprudence from Harvard to be your commentator. All of us tend to be better critics than we are scholars. It's always easier to give feedback than it is to create or produce. So you will get really good feedback in doing that. So I really would advise everyone to think about that, to get feedback on your paper first and revise your paper several times before you send it out. Know what it reads like to someone else. Know what the audience is going to think, to not understand, to appreciate, to not appreciate, and try to revise it in light of that. And then don't worry too much, just send it out. Don't think it's not good enough. I think you should do that. And the last issue then is where. And as I said, I began thinking, well, Aileen will talk about the UK and Ireland and publishing in journals there. And Matthias is based in Germany and very familiar with the European and the international market, and I'm in the US. So, we will talk to those jurisdictions. But as I said, there are sort of common issues to think about across whatever academic market you're submitting your paper in. But I would say about the United States, it has one sort of unique feature, which is there are these student-edited law journals, many law journals. Each university has one what's called flagship journal, the New York University Law Review, the Harvard Law Review, the Tulane Law Review, but then they also have many specialist journals. And I'm guessing that most of our audience today is international and comparative and globally focused. And really many US law schools have a specialist comparative or international or transnational in some cases law journal. And many of them are really interesting and excellent, and they're not primarily US focused. I would say that the flagship journals are primarily US focused. It's really difficult to publish comparative, international or global themed work in a main flagship US law journal, because they are, American journals for mainly a US audience. It's not impossible. Sometimes if you've got a really stunning piece that has significance for everyone, domestic as well as international, you may well be lucky and get it into a flagship journal. But I think it's wiser in many cases, not always, but to think about the journal in the kind of area that you're publishing in that sort of area of law. And there are also a couple of European law journals in the US, the main one being the Columbia Journal of European Law. So there is opportunity in the US to publish non-American focused work, but you have to, choose your journal carefully. The second thing that's, I don't know, is it unique but unusual to the US is multiple submission. And again, that's an advantage in some ways. It has upsides and downsides. The advantage is you don't have to just choose one journal and then worry as the weeks go by, and when you're waiting to hear about time passing and you're not sure if it'll be accepted, you can submit to many, and there isn't a limit on the number of these journals you can apply to. Sometimes that doesn't help particularly. You still sit and wait and wonder, for weeks, but it does mean that there's a chance that more people will read your work. A huge emphasis is placed in the US, and this goes back to what I said about an abstract. On the first page or two of your article, is the abstract compelling? Does it suggest a really interesting piece? Are the first couple of pages well written? Do they draw in the reader, and so on? That's really important, because if there's multiple submissions, these journals are getting many, many hundreds of submissions, and they have piles. And in order to work through the pile and to get out of the pile into the let's really read this one, you have to be able to show that your piece is interesting, important, and worth reading. So that's the other feature. There are multiple submission and so on, many journals, but they're student edited for the most part, which means not peer reviewed in a formal sense. And again, that's a disadvantage and has its advantages too. The disadvantage is you don't get that structured feedback from peers, from people who really know the field, are used to doing this, know what a good article needs. On the other hand, these are very bright students. They're learning to edit themselves through this process. And having myself submitted articles through the US journal submission process, I've often had just as, I hate to say this, but just as good feedback from the student editors as I might have got from professional, advanced career academics. Again, it goes to that point I made earlier that we're all good critics. It's much easier as a reader to see the flaws, to see what doesn't follow, to see what needs to be done, than when you're in the creative business yourself trying to write. So the student edited law journals have real sort of advantages for people submitting, especially if you pick out the ones that are interested in comparative material and so on, and submit to them. Having said that, and I'm pretty sure that Aileen is going to say more about this, and maybe Sergio in due course, the feedback that you get through the peer review process when you choose to submit to a peer-reviewed journal, as I think many, if not most, European journals still are, and the International Journal of Constitutional Law, of which I'm a co-editor, does, peer review is incredibly important. And even if, I know this always seems a bit, fatuous to say, but even if your piece is rejected, if you get some feedback through that process, that is invaluable, because you can always submit again. Everyone's papers are rejected many times. All of us have had our papers rejected many times from journals. It's part of the process. It may be that that journal just has had enough pieces on your topic already. It may be that, for whatever reason, they felt it needed more work. But any feedback you can get, particularly through the peer review process, is going to be enormously helpful. Even if you disagree with some of it, you can see what the issues are that are raised for people, what they feel is the problem. And either you might need to explain yourself better to try to ward off those comments, or you might need to explain why you're not doing that. Or it is a good piece of advice that you need to take on board, and you should do that. You should try to revise your piece in the light of the feedback you got. So I would say that, although you have to choose a journal when you're submitting to a peer review journal and in jurisdictions, not like the US, you usually have to start with one journal only, and that takes time. There are real advantages to that as well, to peers who know what the subject is, who know what you're if your contribution is worthwhile, is distinctive, they understand the background. In student edited law journals, often the students are just learning as they're going, and it doesn't make them not excellent readers, but it means they're not as knowledgeable about the field as a peer-reviewed journal. So you'll probably get more sophisticated subject-specific feedback through the peer review process. My time is almost up, so I'm going to finish. But again, I do want to emphasize that point about rejection and not to let it get you down. I know it does. Everyone hates to get the letter back, but you know, I've heard it from so many really senior, distinguished professors about how their, you know, early articles were rejected from multiple journals, and you know how they've kept all the rejection letters as a kind of memento and so on. So it is just a part of the process, and you know, just look at it again, revise it in light of whatever feedback you've got, and submit again. There are so many journals out there. You will find a good home for your piece. Just be committed to it. I'm going to stop there and hand over to Aileen.
So is that right, Sergio, that I'll go next?
So it seems that Gráinne changed the order, but whatever you want.
I'm fine to go.
Yeah.
I'll leave it to you.
Matthias doesn't care, we can go with you. Okay.
Okay, great. Well, what I have to say follows on from what Gráinne said, and thanks so much for this opportunity. I mean, what we know is for all of us that the journals are a gateway to getting a job, keeping a job, getting promoted, recognition of our work. And I think in the ICON community, we are committed to ensuring that those gateways are as wide and as open as possible. And one issue that I've come across, having done some of these publishing workshops a lot with doctoral students and early career students, early career scholars, is that they sometimes don't enter that gate from the get-go. They decide, no, I'm not going to submit to the best journals, or I'm going to submit to a lesser one, I may get rejected. This fear or anticipation of rejection, I find, is common. And what I have to say is aimed to try and encourage you to do your best work. And by best work, I mean a substantial and significant contribution to scholarship which can stand the test of time. Really your best work, but then I really want to urge you to submit it to the best journals. Many people do excellent work and then they self-censor. They decide not to submit it to the best journals, and that is a real shame, because there is some excellent work in lesser journals or journals with very low profile. And the sad fact is that that great work sinks to the bottom of the academic seabed, never to be discovered again. And that's a waste of your great scholarship and energy. So I'm going to give a little overview about the UK publishing scene, at least as far as academic journals are concerned. But what I have to say, I think, applies more broadly as well. Okay, so I said submit to the best journals. What are the best journals in the UK? The best journals are perceived to be the generalist ones, and they include, in no particular order, the Oxford Journal of Legal Studies, the Modern Law Review, the Law Quarterly Review, and the Cambridge Law Journal. And then specifically for public law, and in the UK, what we mean by public law includes constitutional and administrative law. That is the journal called simply Public Law. So these articles are the best. Why publish there? Well, obviously, you know, you may be thinking to yourself, that would be great on my CV and great for my career. This is true because these journals have prestige. It is hard to get into them, but the benefit of that is that they are a real marker of quality. If you get one article in one of these journals, people sit up and listen, they see it. So if we are in our job trying to communicate, which I think we are trying to do, why spend all this time working hard on a great piece of scholarship? We want people to read it. The best journals are where these articles will be read. Okay, so one question is whether these UK journals carry comparative law. What I would say is this, that the generalist journals and public law, they cater for a generalist UK-based audience. There's no getting around that. However, they do carry comparative and international pieces if that article is framed to be read by a generalist UK audience. So obviously, if you're doing comparative law with the UK, that's an easy sell. If you're doing some broader comparative work, then you would have to think about how to pitch that to a UK-based audience. Okay, so just a few points about the general scene, which contrast a bit with the American environment. So first of all the articles in these journals are blind peer reviewed, and they genuinely are. They claim to be, but they really are. They are sent out to 2 reviewers, not 3, 2. They are reviewed anonymously. If the reviewer knows you or is familiar with the piece, they will normally say, I cannot review it because I know this piece and the author. So it really is blind. That makes it democratic and meritocratic. The likelihood of being accepted depends on the quality of your argument and the quality of your article, not your institutional affiliation, where you work, who you did your PhD with. None of this matters. What matters is the quality of the argument. So in a sense, that's daunting, but it's also liberating as well. In the generalist journals, the rate of acceptance is about 1 in 10. I've consulted with the general editors of all of these journals. They confirm that statistic. In the Oxford Journal of Legal Studies, they provide detailed statistics of acceptance rates every year. It averages at about 1 in 10. Okay, so here we get to the anticipation of rejection issue. That means stiff competition, no doubt about it. 1 in 10 are accepted, 9 are rejected. Well, the editors, and I know from being on the editorial board as well, you should bear in mind that a percentage are rejected for the sheer reason that it doesn't fit the journal, that it's not in the journal style, that it's in excess of the word limit. That's a silly reason to be rejected. So you really do need to do your homework. Go to the websites of these journals, check their requirements and meet them. Just fit your article to what they want. That's a way of heading off at the pass and easy rejection. The other thing is to get a sense of the character of each of these journals. I don't have enough time here to go into what I think the character is, but you need to go to each one. Look at their general statements of the type of work they want. Look at the editorial board. The editorial board are on the hook for reviewing for that journal. That means that your piece may go out to them or may go out to people they work with. That gives you a flavor also of the type of work the journal takes. The other thing is to look, I know it sounds obvious, but to look at the journal itself. With online reading now, we tend to look at isolated journals and we're less familiar with taking an entire issue or annual volume in our hands, whether electronically or physically. Have a look at the journal in the round in the last 3 years. Get a sense of the flavor of articles that are accepted there and published there. This will give you an indication. One good marker is, what are the journals that you are citing most in your own work? That is a good indication for what is for you the best journal. And as I said, you should be trying to submit to the best. I would say that there's an element of luck involved, and maybe this is something in broader conversations we don't talk about, but I think we should be open about. Your article could be sent to someone who loves this kind of work, loves the approach you're taking, has championed it over his or her career as well. Or it could be sent to someone who just does not like that kind of thing, does not value it. Now, obviously, it's going to be harder. The threshold will be higher for reviewer number 2 than reviewer number 1. And there is no way around this. This is a human process. It is fair and blind reviewed and anonymous And I can testify that both as a submitter and as a reviewer. However, there's an unavoidable human element. Some people will like it and some people will not. My advice is to just take that as a reality of the process, a facet of the process. Critique from somebody who does not share your overall perspective is still highly valuable. And you take that on board, you try to respond to the critique, and then you submit elsewhere. So just in my final comments, that's just a whistle-stop tour of the process and the expectations in the UK. I should say that in terms of response time, the expectation here and the commitment in the UK is that you should get a response one way or the other within 3 months. That is common across all of the journals. Some might come earlier in general than others, but in general 3 months is a good marker. That is the expectation within the system. It would be acceptable, for example, if the article, if you heard nothing, I don't mean day one after that 3 months, but after a substantial amount of time has elapsed, it is acceptable to email an editor and say, look, I noticed that there has been something of a delay. I wonder when I might receive a review. Again, this illustrates the fact that it's a human process. Maybe one of the reviewers was ill, and so the editor will then respond to you. They will email the reviewer and try and precipitate a review. So there's nothing unacceptable about that. It's perfectly normal. Okay, so that's a quick overview, and it's to urge you to look at these journals, familiarize yourself with them. And on the analogy of the elevator pitch, I would say you have to pitch your piece to the right journal. So it is worth investing some time in this. Okay, so I mentioned at the beginning, and Gráinne mentioned as well, this idea of rejection. Having done publishing workshops a lot, this comes up. People say, well, I don't want to get rejected, or maybe my piece isn't good enough, a kind of frailty or lack of confidence. The perception that you're more likely to be rejected in the better journals than in the others. And then some say that they are under pressure to publish something rather than nothing, and sooner rather than later. A lot of early career scholars in the UK and elsewhere say this. They're under pressure from their institution to get something out fast, and therefore they don't submit to the better journals, the more recognized ones. So all those reasons are so understandable and relatable, and we've all been there. We've all felt this, and rejection is not easy. And to submit yourself to a process where you know is highly competitive, and rejection is, I suppose, statistically quite likely, that requires some courage. But fortune favors the brave here. And I would urge you to put those thoughts out of your mind. Yes, you do the best work you can do, substantial pieces of work. These journals only accept, if you like, big articles that are not just an ephemeral comment on the here and now, but a significant contribution to scholarship. When you do the best you can, then forget the fear of rejection. It may or may not be rejected, and go for it. Okay, what happens then if you are rejected? What I would say, again, echoing what Gráinne said, take criticism seriously, but do not take rejection personally. Again, that's easier said than done. It's easy to take it personally, but I would urge you to try not to do so. Criticism. Now, criticism, I believe, is perhaps the most valuable commodity we have in academic life. If I submit a draft article to Sergio or Gráinne or Matthias or any of my colleagues whose work I really respect, do I expect them to email back the next day and say, this is perfect, this is wonderful, I see no problem? No, I don't know whether this has ever occurred if the person has read it properly. And I am hoping that they will come back to me to say, look, I think you've overlooked this point. I think you have got this part of the argument wrong. That is gold dust. You know, we thank people at the beginning of our articles for giving us feedback because everybody is busy and it's hard to do this work, supporting each other, which we all try to do, even though everybody is busy. So if you get rejected, it's not just a mere rejection. It will come with criticism, which is valuable. Now, it might not seem valuable to you in the moment. What I would say is make it as constructive as it can be. Think, what did I do to mislead that reader? So sometimes you feel the criticism is unjust or misguided or does not reflect your article. You might think, well, I made that point in footnote 225. Well, if you've made that point in footnote 225, then probably you have not flagged it up sufficiently to anticipate and counter the argument that has been put to you. So I think we need to value the criticism and take it as par for the course. Now, one piece of advice, and Sergio, you let me know if I go over time. One of the best pieces of advice that I got at the very beginning of my career, and I've applied it ever since, and I try to tell others to do so, is this: that when you're writing an article, make a list of 5 potential journals. You choose the best first. What is your dream journal that you want to get, you really want to get into it? That's your number 1. But you have that at the top of a list. This is making the normal process of submitting, and perhaps criticism and rejection, not necessarily, but possible, into the process of submitting. Now, if you get rejected and you get criticism, then you must take that criticism seriously, reflect on your article, try to improve it, and then you submit to number 2. Okay, and hopefully it doesn't go on and on and on forever down that list, but you know, sometimes there are articles that are not quite ready or require a lot of consideration, a lot of reflection, and that may well be the case. So just one final point, and that is about the pressure I feel that early career scholars are under to publish lots and to publish it now. This can lead to habit forming practices early on in your career where one can be tempted to publish lots and lots of smaller pieces, not caring where they go. My own view, and I don't know how Matthias or Gráinne feels, is that quality outranks quantity every time. I have never been on a promotion panel. This may vary, of course, across jurisdictions, but I've never been on any of these panels or discussions of a scholar's work where somebody says, well, he published 30 articles and she published 10. There is a more fine-grained analysis of where it was published, what the argument was, what the quality was. And I think regardless of the pressures you're under, and obviously I understand you have to accommodate them, choose quality, both in your own work, prioritizing substantial pieces, but then the quality of where you put it as well. Don't undersell your work. There is nothing more heartbreaking than finding an excellent article, a superb article in a journal that nobody is reading. That is a shame. That was somebody who may be self-censored inappropriately or didn't get the right advice. So I think the good advice is, hard though it may be, do your best work. Submit to the best journals, the journals you dream of being part of. Just do it. And criticism is part of our job. We need to develop a thick skin about this and learn to take it as part of our daily bread, but something that's also especially valuable. And you notice that more as time goes on. So I think I'll leave it there, Sergio, and let Matthias come in, and I'm happy to answer questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Aileen. Matthias?
Thank you very much. So I was afraid, being the third speaker, that this would be a completely redundant presentation that I'm going to give. I see now after the last intervention that it's probably not going to be that case, but there are some certain things that we even among the panel might have to discuss among ourselves. I think there's a lot, and it's very good to have this opportunity. So thank you very much to the organizers for letting me speak here. I prepared a small PowerPoint. I will share that with you now. I hope you can see. Can you see that? Is that possible? Someone said, is that okay? Thank you very much. Okay, so this is my presentation. I've got 4 points which I want to rush through. I'll probably skip those that others have covered, especially on how to write your article. Gráinne has given an excellent overview of 5 points. I really like that very much. But I'll first begin with saying something on psychological resilience, and then how to write, how to choose your journal, and how to promote your research. I think the last point is also very important. Now, let me say something about psychological resilience. I think, as it may have appeared already, we are in a very stressful field, and we're exposed to a lot of competition for jobs, but also for publications. And it's very difficult to survive in that environment, especially when jobs become few and far between, as it is currently the case for multiple reasons. And that's why I'm a little bit worried about what I've just heard about journal rankings and about how you should approach it. Now, I think the first thing, I think the two, my fellow panelists will agree with me that it's important to keep in mind it's not you if you get rejected. It's not a personal rejection. It's also okay, I think, to be angry. Don't let this get out of hand. Don't let this overwhelm you. You know, in the sense that you will never submit again to the same journal. Yeah, it might not have worked one time. Next time you might still have better cards with a different project. So don't let yourself be eaten up by that feeling of grief. But it's okay to have it, and everybody has it, and everybody gets their fair share of rejection. So if you get rejections, that's fine. Now, the second bullet point is probably the most important thing that I want to say here. There's no single quality standard. I'm very worried. Now, concerning this list of top journals, Aileen gave us a list of 4 top journals. Now, I take it that there's some descriptive truth in it, but I'm concerned about that for normative reasons and also for descriptive reasons. First of all, I think it's not entirely true. Well, there might be this idea that there's a list of top journals into which you absolutely have to get. I think that scholarship as such, especially if you see it from a non-English speaking country, is a lot more diverse than that. And also because, to have that single list of best criteria would mean that we all agree on what is really good scholarship. And there can be disagreements. There have been, in the past, there have been serious contestations of what is the appropriate methodology and what isn't. And that went even very political. So I think even to advocate, well, while there are some journals which are more popular than others, which is totally true, but to advocate an enumerative list of journals is not really true. There is scholarship which is just different and which would never make it into one of the top 4 because of its methodological setup or its preferences or its political preferences. We also have to talk about that. And I'm not even sure whether that would be a good idea, because if we only had 4 top journals into which you absolutely have to get, many of us will never get into them. And it would mean that many of us would not have a fulfilled life as scholars, a fulfilled professional life. This is a consequence that I'm not yet willing to accept. The second thing it would mean is that there would be very little diversity concerning topics, concerning methodologies, etc. And the third point is probably that, it overestimates and it even increases, if we talk about it, like in an enumerative list, it even increases a tendency that algorithms and our data-based reality of research create already. Now, algorithms have the tendency to generate more attention for stuff that already gets a lot of attention, because algorithms can't read papers. They only can register clicks and what people liked, what has been clicked already somewhere. So I would say that, you know, and that is a normative argument. I would say that as scholars, we should even say that, you know, a lot of the top journal hype about top journals is generated electronically, mechanically. It's the journals that you know, you find easily. It's a reflection. It's the result of power. Where the people work that run these journals, who the publishers are. It's not so much a function of quality. So therefore, if you want to be powerful, go for the four best. But we should not mix up power with quality. That's all I can say about that. Of course, as a young scholar, you often cannot afford to defeat major. You know, to defeat the logics of power, and it would be quite heroic to try to push against forces that are just irresistible. Yeah, and you can't push against them. So to some extent, of course, what Aileen says has value and is something that should make you think about. But just to give you a little bit of optimism that it's also worthwhile publishing in one of the in a journal that is not among the top four. Now, while it might work as a signal on your CV that you've published in a good journal, wherever I've been in appointment committees on either side, people actually read your stuff. And that means that you know, quality primes, yeah, and the quality difference between the top four and the rest of the journal landscape sometimes is not that big, yeah. So don't be afraid. You can have a successful career even if it doesn't get to the highest ranked journals, or what some might consider as the highest ranked. So I've lost a lot of time on that point already, but that was really important for me to make. Let's not run already to an overcrowded place where there's so many people. If you run to the overcrowded journals, to the overly popular journals, you risk getting a lot of desk rejections, and that's a very unpleasant exercise. Or even if you get a full review, it might be very short, it might be very perfunctory. Popular journals very often can afford to outsource reviews. So you get a review by someone who's not committed to that journal, who doesn't actually care about the journal at all. We at the German Law Journal, we don't do that. We only review internally because we want people to be committed. We want people to actually care about what it's in the journal. And not to reject it for you know, reasons that have nothing to do with journal policy. Of course, you cannot fully avoid that, and I'm totally aware of the drawbacks of peer review. But you know, this genuine interest in a journal is more common among smaller journals. I'd just mentioned I've had myself personally had a very grateful experience with an article that was rejected by a top-ranked journal, and then it appeared in the journal called Global Constitutionalism, which some of you might know, and I think they really deserve credit for that, because that was the single best experience. The editors of that journal care so much about the content. I got two very, very thorough reviews, and then even the editors-in-chief said, we want you to look into comments A, B, C of editor number 1. You can also look into the others, but they're not crucial for us. And so there was even an added filter on top of the reviews, and that I thought is excellent. But a large journal, like even the German Law Journal, could not afford that. Our submissions also go into the hundreds. We could not do that. Yeah, to provide that kind of personal feedback. So there are also advantages to publishing in smaller journals. So maybe so much on the point of psychological resilience. Of course, all of us want to have a job, but you know, before this destroys you, and before you put too much of your self-esteem into publishing a big journal, go for the smaller ones. Yeah, or yeah, and that brings you probably to. That would bring you to the third point, but maybe on how to write your article. As I said, I can only fully and wholeheartedly endorse what Gráinne said on that point. I would say that originality is really the most important point that maybe sums up many of the points that Gráinne made. And just a small reminder, don't understand originality in a monolithic way. Yeah, it doesn't always have to be the big paradigm shift. Yeah, it's almost a cliche that everybody wants to advance paradigm shifts with their articles. So there's a lot of value and a lot of originality to be found also in things that are more incremental, that observe things. My advice on it for a younger journal, for a younger colleague, would be capitalize on your advantage. Your advantage is time. Do something that's time intense. If you're into historical research, go to the archives. If you're into empirical research, do interviews. Try to do quantitative stuff, even though empirical research is more than only quantitative studies. But do something that a senior scholar might be unable to do just for a lack of time. Yeah, that is how you can capitalize on it. If you've got the opinion number 250 on the PSPP judgment, just to pick an example, it might be relatively difficult to compete with someone, unless you really have a unique take on it. But if you have got materials, interesting materials, then you're on a very safe side already. And that is actually my experience, that a lot of younger researchers come up with interesting materials, but then the second bullet point is where is where the problems begin. Structure. You need to form a coherent argument, and people sometimes tend to underestimate that you don't only have to reveal interesting information, but you have to bring it in a good order. And there has to be a golden thread running through your entire article. And that is something that requires actual work. You will write many structures, drafts, and revise them 100 times. And it's not, don't wait for the ingenious moment when you found finally your structure, but just think that this is a process, a thought process. And what helps me sometimes when I'm stuck, when I don't get around it, is to change the medium I'm using, to go away from your computer, use, for example, a flip chart, or use pen and paper. Most of the time, I actually use pen and paper just to structure my argument. And psychological research says that this really makes a difference, and that your creativity is being advanced by just going to another subject, to another medium. Now, abstract and introduction, I think we've heard a lot about that. My last advice on non-native speakers: it's always difficult to write in English. We all struggle with it. Every day, honestly, till this day, I have got this list of vocabulary of idioms that I'm keeping and that I'm adding something every day when I hear an interesting phrase that I wouldn't consider part of my active vocabulary. But what helps sometimes to really write legible English, and Gráinne said something about clarity. I agree. This is super crucial. It helps to read it out loud. Yeah, if you stumble of your own words, probably you're not where you want to be. Yeah, and now how to choose your journal. I think I've said a lot about that already. I'd give a chance also to a broader horizon, and also consider scholarship as an essentially pluralistic endeavor. Yeah, of course they're the top law schools on the East Coast, and I like them very much. They're super exciting, but there are also jobs at other law schools where different things might count. Yeah, and just keep that in mind if you want to really have a career. I would also go a little bit even beyond journal articles. Of course, we all know the significance of journal articles for spreading your research. It's just the numbers of citations tell you that this is a very, very efficient means of disseminating your research. But on the other hand, I would not underestimate monographs. If I just, in preparation for this, I realized that in some of my recent pieces, the form of publication I'm citing most is the monograph, especially the short monograph, even more than journal articles. Yeah, especially if you do a bit more historical research. Yeah. Anyway, another thing is also carefully crafted, edited volumes that really advance an original research theme. I would still not underestimate that. Yeah, even as publishers have done a lot to make them available electronically. The problem is libraries don't buy edited volumes anymore that much. Yeah, only if you sit in one of the top libraries, they will buy it. But more and more, this gets into databases that are available. Yeah. One thing that I would not underestimate is open access. Instead of, the one thing is, of course, your journal should be very reputable, or you should at least be happy with the reputation of your journal. But sometimes, a journal or a publication that is open access might also find its way in times of Google and of Google Scholar in particular, and electronic research. Open access is really a very good way, and it's something that you even should put into your balance of arguments to consider when picking a journal. And if you're lucky to be at an institution that pays for you to put something open access in a non-open access journal, then go for it. Yeah. Anyway, last point, especially if you don't make it into the top-notch journals, there are ways of spreading your research, and you see it here already. I think that increasingly people are reading social media, they're not reading journals. I see it with myself. I get lots of a table of contents of journals that I've subscribed to. I don't always read them. I mean, the top 3 I probably still open, but beyond that, I simply don't have the time. Still, if I find something on Twitter, someone tweeting about their research, and making a small feed, yeah, and maybe adding a few pictures and adding a document that is exceptional that they found, and taking a picture of it, that can be a very effective way of disseminating your research, and people will actually react to that. I also retweet that, generously, because I think it's if someone has a good point and explains it to a wide readership, for people with little time, that is really optimal, and that is something that journals often cannot do for you. Yeah, they can retweet you maybe, but we simply don't have the time for that. We're trying to increase our social media activity at the German Law Journal. I know that ICANN has done a lot on that, but ultimately, I think this is really one of the points where you as an author can invest time that will be valuable. And of course, conferences, someone has said that already. If you go to conferences, try to come with your research. I mean, try to organize maybe a panel that fits your research. ICANN Society conferences provide an excellent forum for that. Just try to get 3-4 other people that share your interests and to an ICANN conference. And then even if not that many people are attending, people will read it on the program. They will see your abstract. They will see your name, etc. So it's really a chance for you. And then I still consider it also as legitimate to send around your research to colleagues, for example, to those that you cited most. Now, I know that some people in the English-speaking world have told me that they would consider that as, a bit too a little bit inappropriate if you send your research to someone. In the place I'm from, it's quite natural to send it to someone. I think it's even a kind of a sign of respect and of appreciation if you think someone is important enough to read your stuff. Yeah, and then if you add a nice personal email, a short email, then I think there's no risk. There are only chances. Of course, you can't do that to 100 people, but do it to the 10 people or 15 people that you really want to read this research. That's all I have to say. Sorry for taking a bit longer. Thank you very much.
So I'd like to thank Gráinne, Aileen, and Matthias for these very useful presentations. We will now start with the Q&A sessions. We received many questions, so I'm not sure if we will have the time to reply to all of them, but to make things a little bit easier, I grouped the questions by topic. So first, we will be speaking about journal selection, then we will be speaking about feedback, then we will be speaking about strategies for early career scholars, and some skeptical questions about the review process that I saw in the comments. So let's start with the journal selection. I will just read some of the questions on this theme, and I will give you the speakers the chance to pick the questions they want to reply within this, starting with the same order we did before. So Gráinne, Aileen, and Matthias. So first, from an anonymous attendee, is wondering whether any advice for those who write primarily about the law of small jurisdictions that is not the UK. When, if at all, would such work have a place in a well-known international journals? Is adding an element of comparison with the law of the US or the UK the only way to get published in such journals? Then there is a question addressed to Professor Kavanagh from Team Sire. Do you think that the OGLS, CLJ, LQR, MLR take different kinds of articles? For example, empirical work, would I focus on, or should I focus on a specific journal instead? Then Eman Rashwan asked whether online journals are a bad place to publish his work. Then an anonymous attendee wants to know regarding the UK submissions. If turnaround is 3 months and there are yearly publication targets we are required to meet, will the article not be considered if it is submitted simultaneously to different journals? So this is specific to UK submissions. Then from Gilad Abiri, I wonder whether someone can speak more on the differences between the UK and US articles, length being just one. Then we have 2 questions from anonymous attendees who wonder how to find a home for an interdisciplinary article. This type of pieces tend to take an integrated approach to the argument being presented, but does not adopt one or the other disciplinary framework as the predominant frame of analysis. Is it best to abandon interdisciplinary academic work given the challenges of placing these pieces in top journals? The other anonymous attendee in this related question asks, should one look for a smaller specialized journals catering to this sort of research, or tailor the research output to fit one particular discipline in order to reach the more influential journals of that discipline? And finally, from Natalie Sedaka, I am interested in any other views on whether a generalist journal is always preferable to a reasonably well-known specialized one. So the speakers can take any questions they want to reply about this theme, and then we will move on to the next theme.
So could I come in there, Sergio, just because there were a few questions there that are UK specific, but also because of Matthias's point where we had maybe a different perspective, and this is common when academics get together to talk about publishing. And I should say that I agreed with almost everything Matthias said, but there was this difference of emphasis, certainly. So I'll do these specific questions quickly and then engage with this broader question. So somebody coming from small jurisdictions, of course, now I am in a small jurisdiction of Ireland. Can you publish from a small jurisdiction in UK journals? Yes, you can, if you show what might be interesting about that to a UK generalist audience, I'm afraid. The Oxford Journal of Legal Studies states specifically that it does not publish material from other jurisdictions standing in isolation unless they have a broader comparative or theoretical or interdisciplinary significance. Okay, so that's a shame for small jurisdictions because I'm also in one of them, so I feel for you. But if you wanted to publish in these journals, then you would have to have a link with the UK. In the UK journal Climate, no, you cannot submit simultaneously to multiple journals. All of them state that you must go for one at a time because there's a huge investment of work that goes into reviewing your article. It's viewed as not acceptable at all. So you would have to do it sequentially, not simultaneously. On Matthias's point about the general journals, so what I would say is this: I wasn't saying. I often come across excellent work in lesser known journals. I wasn't saying even that all work in these top ranking journals is excellent. Sometimes it is not. So quality does not correspond directly to these journals. But what I was saying was that if you're somewhere over the world and you want to publish your piece in a place where it will be read, it will be treated with, it will have the prestige and cachet that it has. And based on my experience of talking to lots of scholars who just don't muster up the confidence to submit to these big journals, they rule themselves out. I was saying, which are the ones that are widely perceived to be the prestigious journals? That may be unfair, but those are the ones unequivocally that are treated as having that prestige. And I was urging and would still urge early career scholars, if those are the best journals for them, then do not rule yourself out from submitting it. I mean, the metaphor you used, Matthias, was why rush to this crowded place? But what I would say is, when you go to that crowded place, there are lots of people listening. If you go to a very secluded place, there are fewer people reading it. But I accept totally what you say, that now with Twitter, with social media, with doing a blog post which highlights your article, there are lots of ways of increasing your readership, and I think Twitter and blogging is one of those. As your career goes on, it just doesn't matter where you publish, because people will go for those articles. But at the early stage, when people want to get promotion, my supportive comment to them is, be brave, submit to what you consider to be the best journal. Within the UK, the ones I identified are just widely accepted as having that quality status, independent of the content and quality of your article. Yeah. So I was doing it as an encouraging for it. Sometimes the specialist journals are better for you, but if you want to publish, generally in the UK, these are the prestige. These are the prestigious journals, and I would encourage everyone not to rule themselves out from that.
So let me pick up a few. I just have to apologize. I tried to begin by answering some of the questions, so there are some answers to some of the early questions, but I'm a terrible multitasker, so I was losing the thread of the discussion while I was answering those, so I've stopped. And I'll try. There's so many good questions. Sergio, one you didn't mention in your sum up, I think, but that I see coming up a lot, is a critical perspective on peer review. So I think that might be something worth talking about as well, because I know people have asked specific questions like, what if you just disagree with what the reviewer says, and they disagree with you in a very fundamental way? Or what if you know that peer reviewer knows you because you're so distinctive, or your topic, or the way you write, or something like that? And also, isn't it just a brutal process? There's some truth to all of that. It can be, we're all humans, right? And whatever human your paper gets sent out to has their prejudices and idiosyncrasies and all the rest. All I can say is that as a journal editor, we really think carefully about who we send papers to. We try to make sure it's someone in the field. We try to make sure it's not someone, that there's a conflict with in terms of the paper. We try to anonymize everything, all of that. And we also, in the end, make our own judgment. We get review feedback. Sometimes it's very critical and others positive. We get clashes between the reviewers. We make our own judgments in the end. And again, we're just, humans too, and have our own biases and preferences and all that. But, at the same time, it's not a perfect process. It's a process. There are other ways, I guess, we could do this. And actually, SSRN is there now, to allow you to just go put your stuff out there if the journal process is somehow, blocking you out. But I do think, it varies obviously from journal to journal, but we really do try, at least the journals I've been involved with, to avoid the kind of the rivalries, the unpleasantness, also to try to take the sting out of some people express their criticism in harsher ways than others and so on, to try to be constructive with the feedback and so on. So no, I don't think it's a perfect process. I think it can be helpful. It is, you can get some really good, a mirror really in a way of how your work is received by someone who knows about the field. And, you do have to get more robust. I still dread feedback. I dread peer review always. It's like, oh no, now I have to do all of this, or they didn't get it, or, whatever it is. And sometimes if you think they didn't get it, you think, okay, well then I have to explain it better. Or the question I think Alvin asked about, what if they just disagree with my premise? Well, the best thing you can do, I think, is to just be upfront about that. And so to sort of say to the journal editors in your response to reviewers, always try to be as non-defensive as you can in responding to the reviewers, instead of thinking they don't, and just think, okay, so I'll take this on its face and I'll say, I think there's a fundamental disagreement here. I understand that, but it's interesting. That makes this area, a really lively one. And it's why a lot of readers will want to read it, because, reviewer two and I obviously come from really fundamentally different perspectives on this. So to try to, be as constructive as you can, even if you think, oh, that reviewer is an idiot, maybe they are, maybe they're not. But the important thing is that you try to engage constructively with what they say. The thing about the small jurisdictions, again, I think Aileen talked about the fact that there are journals, and if you're applying to a UK journal, they'll say it's got to be comparative, at least, you know, if you're coming here. I already mentioned that what they call the flagship, the main law school journals in the US tend to be focused mainly on US law. That's normal, you know, in a way you could say, well, of course, because like it's in this jurisdiction. The specialized journals less so, and also it's not exclusively true. There, if you can, if the thing that you're writing about is important, you know, if you can show its general importance, then even if that law review doesn't want to know particularly about what's happening in Ireland or Indonesia or Benin or wherever you're writing from, if you think, okay, well, they should, this is important, try and show the general importance of the point. If you can, make it a more general thing, or write to or submit to a journal like ICON, which welcomes, doesn't need you to say, you don't, it doesn't even have to be comparative for ICON, though we like, you know, material that draws on multiple jurisdictions and so on. That's in the nature of the global mission of the journal. But, you know, if you've got something really interesting going on in your jurisdiction or the jurisdiction you know about, we'd love to know about that. Obviously, the more you can make an argument and that it's less just a description of what happened in jurisdiction X, that it's a real, this is what's happening, this is why it matters, this is why my readership should want to know about it, that I think that'll help. But certainly it depends on the journal that you're submitting to. I just remembered another question about the comparison between, you know, US and others in terms of length. Yeah, I glossed over the differences. There are cultural differences. There are, you know, just differences in the way the journals do things. I don't think one's worse or better. They're just different. The US has typically, the law journals have gone for these really long pieces. It's changed in recent years, and it's not quite the mini book anymore. You know, a shorter piece is acceptable, and maybe more for the specialized journals, the international, comparative, European and transnational ones, than the big US law ones. At the same time, there is something a little different there, and I think it's worth bearing in mind also, wherever you're submitting, always think about, Aileen made this point, the journal you're submitting to, look back at a few issues, see what length do they go for? Do they like short, crisp pieces, or are they happy, you know, to give you more space and go for a bigger one? Generally, if you've got more than 10, 12,000 words, you're better off looking towards the US, because you're getting on the big, yeah, I think that's right for Australia, Asia, you know, other jurisdictions too. But certainly I think in Europe, Sergio can talk to Latin America, but, you know, 10,000 is considered long, you know. So if you're applying to the US, there is a sense in which papers in the US are these things people have worked on extensively. You know, this idea of workshopping your paper, you know, you don't write a piece in a month, you know, you spend a long time writing, rewriting, revising, putting it. So, and it is true. I mean, I find myself writing for different, you know, genres. I write for US journals, I write for European journals. It's always a relief to write for a European journal. At least I can write something that's a little less kind of like the big long idea that I've been working on and building up over years. And instead I can just comment on, it's got to be interesting, it's got to have ideas, it's got to be all the things, you know, Matthias said, but it doesn't have to be the magnum opus. Whereas there is a little bit of, you know, the US, the tradition of US law journals is this is a really big piece you've been working on for a long time, with lots of research and lots of ideas, lots of revision, and it's substantial, and it's not the shorter essay or the, you know, but there's plenty of journals that'll take the shorter essay as long as it's really good and interesting, thoughtful, and well worked through, well researched, good scholarly apparatus and all that. So I think, you know, there's a world of journals out there. That's one of the good things. I'm also, and I might get Sergio to come in on this, I know someone asked about Global North, Global South. We're very conscious of that the three of us are from the Global North. We did think about bringing more people in, and we thought we'll just have to have another event, because there are so many issues and so many different regions that we should cover, and these issues of language, of discipline, of diversity. But I think Sergio might be able to speak to some of the questions asked there. I think I answered one in the chat, suggesting one way when you're having to answer to multiple audiences, your own domestic jurisdiction where you want to publish in the right way that's expected for your own community and so on. And then the global journals that have broader readership, but that are often in English, is to do a translated version, acknowledge your earlier, X language version and say, this is a developed version of a paper I published in this journal in this language, and it's translated, it's slightly revised. You don't want to do exactly the same one, but that's one way of kind of addressing this dilemma of, I'm not in one of those jurisdictions where it's in English and it's supposedly global, whereas in fact it's really the global north, but I do want to reach that audience. And so in order to do that, this might be one way of doing so. Finally, sorry, just another point was SSRN came up a few times, and online journals. This is, again, like many of the answers I've already posted, this is just my opinion. This is based on my experience, and I suspect others would take a different view. I argue with Joseph Weiler all the time about this. Joseph doesn't like SSRN. I do. I think SSRN is a great way of just getting your stuff out there. Particularly if you've already got it accepted somewhere, that's even better, because then it'll come out and get the brand of that journal or whatever for your CV, but you get your ideas out and everyone can read it, and you put it up and you say forthcoming in. But even if it's not, right, even let's say you're having trouble getting it into a journal, but you're worrying that other people are going to start writing about this, and maybe someone who heard me present it might take my idea or whatever, getting it onto SSRN as a working paper, gets your idea out there, gets your name on it, gets you a readership. So I'm a fan of SSRN. I understand others might have reservations and so on, but I actually think it's one of the good things that you can actually reach an audience, and your work can speak for itself. It'll go out there, give it a nice abstract and a nice title, and you'll attract some interest, get people reading it. I also, again, this may be very personal, I like online journals. Like I read, Matthias is an editor of the German Law Journal. I think the German Law Journal is great. I think a lot of the US law journals now have online versions. I'm on the American Journal of International Law Board. Far more people read AJIL Unbound, right? The online one, the shorter essays. Here again, the American Journal is not going for the giant, piece, which the flagship journal does, but these shorter pieces, and guess what? Everyone likes them, everyone reads them. They're much more popular. They don't look bad on your CV at all, certainly not from my perspective, and I think plenty of others. They know this is a great new forum for shorter work. Also, we get a much bigger diversity of scholars submitting and writing from all over the world, including the lesser known scholars. So, to those of you worrying that, it's all the big names get into those journals, actually just try some of these more innovative online journals. They're not, to me anyway, they're different. Yes, they're quicker to publish, they publish shorter pieces, they publish more, they are more open, but I think, I even think sometimes they may end up taking over, the mainstream, the longer, sort of more traditional established journals, but that's a good thing.
Yeah, maybe to add a few things on that, I pretty much agree with what Gráinne has said right now about online journals and also blogs taking over certain functions that formerly journals used to have, and that, in my opinion, militates in favor of investing even more into your journal articles, and maybe going a little bit against the traditional European way of writing journal articles and moving towards US and taking articles more seriously as a form of, presenting the result of in-depth, medium-term research that took you a couple of months. Yeah, and if you really have a lot of material that you collected and you've worked on your article a lot, then I think you have good chances to get accepted by a very popular journal. So for that reason, I think if you have got smaller things, if you just want to say something about judgment, sometimes there might be the blog alternative that is even better, and you can work for a couple of days or even weeks on a blog post if it's really succinct. So. Increasingly that even gets cited and referred to by courts. So the Verfassungsblog, just to mention one, has become citable in legal literature. I see it in the German Law Journal. I see people referring to the Verfassungsblog quite a lot. Yeah. So and probably the same is true for the Iconnect blog, because they provide information accessible in a language that many people of us can understand on cases from all around the world. And that's a fantastic thing to do. And that really enriches our scholarship. So I'm not underestimating that. I consider that a true alternative. On comparative, on the question whether your research has to be comparative to make it into a major English language journal, I would agree with Gráinne and even go further and say that we at the German Law Journal, and I also know Icon, have published pieces that aren't really comparative. I remember that fantastic article about, I forgot the author, I'm sorry, but about, social rights in Portugal and Spain it was comparing Portugal and Spain, but, over the course of the history, and that I found so useful for social and economic rights in general. Yeah. So if you have to say something particular about your jurisdiction that feeds into a general development, yeah, then it will be acceptable to any major journal. And that means, if your article is good, i.e. if your article has several levels of reflection, if you're not just reporting about a legal development, but you're putting that in perspective, be it, theoretical perspective, historical, empirical, whatever, then normally you have got the second level where you can read a lot, with which you can reach a very wide readership. Yeah. To control for that, just ask yourself, why would somebody who's reading, like say Icon, be interested in your piece? Yeah, what do they learn? Maybe they learn something about courts in general, or maybe they learn something about law and the economy, or whatsoever. So even if it's just from one jurisdiction, it can be interesting. And I was also glad to see that we get increasing readership, for example, from Latin America, especially if it concerns human rights and constitutional development. So there's a lot of exchange that is possible. And don't feel discouraged. Don't think your research is not comparative enough. I think most the journals I know, they're all looking for diversity. Yeah, and it's so important to get the stuff into English language journals, because only the people from the countries that really know the literature, know the history, know the deeper political, economic, social implications of the law can provide really a very good perspective of the developments of their country. So for scholarship to get diverse and to really get global and not hegemonic or less hegemonic than it might be at times, and I'm saying that as someone who's also coming from a regional hegemonic jurisdiction, I'm very well aware of that. To make it less hegemonic, we need input from elsewhere. And I think all people on journals know that. And so we want diversity. Yeah, don't be scared. Don't think your research is not relevant. Yeah, and just think about why should somebody be interested in that, and then you reach that second level of reflection that qualifies you for a really, really good journal. Yeah, and probably that is also what I want to say about interdisciplinarity. We all love interdisciplinarity. We love your scholarship that bridges different disciplines. Having said that, of course, I know the drawback is that most journals don't have an interdisciplinary readership. Yeah, I think the journals that we represent to some extent do have. But then again, to gain an interdisciplinary readership, it's your option or your chance to write a blog post, to publish it on social media, to send it to someone from another discipline who might introduce it into their own scholarship, or adopt it and cite it, and then you can spread it from there. Yeah. So maybe again, going back to what I said earlier in my intervention, in times of social media, maybe the place where you publish something gets less important as long as there is a quality control. SSRN is fine to get something just out and and put your name on it, and maybe also get feedback, and and disseminate your research, especially if you're at an early stage. If you want to later publish it in a journal that is closed access, then it might really be a good idea to have a draft on SSRN, which is normally okay under the copyright rules. But still, the problem with SSRN is that the advantage of a journal is that it kind of, it's selective. Yeah, it provides a certain quality etiquette to your research, or it puts this quality label on your research. Yeah, and therefore, okay, go for SSRN, but make sure that you also bring it into a ordinary journal. I suppose that's all what I said. There was one question by Vandana Yanchandani on patience. I think patience is really an important point. Yeah, Gráinne has said something about, you know, when you can inquire, and it's always fine to inquire. By the way, I think it's always fine to write editors-in-chief whether you should publish something, whether they think that, you know, topic-wise it fits into the journal. I get lots of these emails, and I always try to really answer them to the best of my ability in good faith, and that's totally fine. You know, if you're unsure, just get in touch with the editors. And but on the patient side, even an online-only journal like the German Law Journal might sometimes test your patience. Yeah, not because we're trying to be lame or delay you, not at all, but just because we get a lot of material, and even if there's a commitment to do a peer review within 6 weeks, which I think is standard for many journals. Some journals even say 4 months, and Aileen has said earlier on that 4 weeks. Others say 3 months. I think all of that is fine. Even if your journal, if your paper is accepted after that time, you may still have to wait for a couple of months. Yeah, and just also because the publishing process is so complex. Yeah, it has to go through so many hands. Even if we're doing the best, so to say, we will always take 3 to 4 months, yeah, to get it out. And even in an online-only journal, it can take a year from submission to publication, especially if it's an unsolicited. Yeah, if you're part of a special issue, then sometimes you might be fast-tracked. Yeah, just because the special issue needs to get out, and someone is always late, and then you need to rush to get it through. But if it's an unsolicited submission, be patient. And for that reason, it's important to put it out on SSRN already. That can really help, or put it into a working paper series. Your law school might have one, or you might get into any of the available existing working paper series, just to put your name on it, because we live in a very fast-paced world, and we somehow have to navigate that.
So thank you to everyone. So we need to finalize now. Unfortunately, we weren't able to reply to all the questions. Gráinne was mentioning a question from Carlos Vichet about the Global South. I replied in the Q&A feature if anyone is interested. Of course, if you feel free to email any of us with further questions you want. The issue of the Global South is an important one. So I will propose to have a separate panel for that. I think it will make a lot of sense, and inviting editors also from the top Global South journals will make a lot of sense. Many of the questions that we didn't respond were responded in some ways, like the SSRN question was, I counted 4 times that question was asked, so that's a good thing. But for now, I would like to, on behalf of the co-presidents of the Society, Lorenzo Cassini and Rosalind Dixon, I would like to thank Aileen, Gráinne, and Matthias for their wonderful presentations. And I would like to thank you for attending this ICONES live event, and to invite you to support our activities by becoming a member of the Society. And also a reminder for the next ICONES live event, you're all invited to join the live discussion of Helen Landemore's new book on open democracy, reinventing popular rule of law for the 21st century. It will be held on March 23 at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. The panel will be joined by the author, in addition to Roberto Gargarella, Adrian Stone, Nadia Urbinate, Rachel Walsh, Fred Felix Zaumseil, and it will be moderated by Elizabeth Pernham. So